Jackson County. I've been with the district attorney's office for 30 years now. Handled most of any kind of a case you can imagine, and probably quite a few that you haven't imagined. I am happy to be here, happy to receive input and listen to the concerns and feelings of the folks on this forum. As well, I hope to continue to do that into the future. If I'm blessed enough to be elected to this office. So thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to introduce you to Mr. Gordon McLaughlin, also an assistant district attorney, or formerly an assistant district attorney for Larimer County.
Hey everyone, first thanks Kim and NoCoSafeSpa so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity and being able to chat about these issues. I am Gordon McLaughlin. I'm running as a Democrat for district attorney here in Larimer and Jackson counties, the 8th Judicial District. I was a deputy district attorney in Larimer County for about 7 years and worked in some other judicial districts before that as well. And I'm looking to make some changes to the way our criminal justice system works here in Larimer County. And I'm anxious to get everyone's input here and answer some questions and have a conversation. So thank you.
Perfect, thank you. I'll let you know how it's going to look. We are going to ask a series of questions. Each assistant district attorney will get to, will pass off who gets to go first. They'll have approximately 90 seconds to 2 minutes. I'll give them a beep at 90 seconds. It'll just come over the audio of your computer. Ooh. And you can finish up your thoughts, and then we'll move on to the next candidate, and then we'll move on to the question after that. I do have some follow-ups, and if folks listening from home or watching from home, if you have follow-ups, you're welcome to put them in the chat, and if we have time, we'll get to them. So if there are not any other questions from our candidates.
Can I add one thing?
Yes, please.
Well, I use he and him, and I am going to do my best to get the language correct. I may add an ED here and there. If I do, I apologize. It's not my intent to offend anybody. I am always learning, and so I'll do the best I can. Thanks.
Appreciate that. And in this space, we will do everything we can to be forgiving. So because we recognize that allies have to start somewhere and we have to learn as we go. So for those of you that are watching, if you follow my page, you know I'm a big advocate for being an ally and teaching allies how to engage with us. So, all right, who went first on intros? Okay, so Mr. McLaughlin or Gordon, the first question is, where do you volunteer and why? And will you continue to do that volunteer work after being elected as Larimer County District Attorney?
That's a great question. I volunteer a number of places around town. The two big ones are the Food Bank of Larimer County. I'm on the advisory council for the Food Bank of Larimer County and had done just some basic grunt work, as I call it, around the warehouses and so forth before I assumed that role. I got involved in that for a couple of reasons. One, because I think we need to be providing the basic resources to our community to make this a successful and healthy and equal community, and things like food, housing resources. Those are some of the basic building blocks that a community starts on. And so making sure that everyone's fed is really important. And to me, those things do impact the criminal justice system, because certainly we see a lot of crime with root causes in things like substance abuse, behavioral health, lack of food, lack of housing. And then before I went to law school, I was also a chef. And so food and feeding folks is sort of near to my heart. And, I've worked in some fancy restaurants and seen the sort of waste and privilege that comes along with food sometimes. And, really wanted to make sure that I was going to the opposite end and making sure folks on a really basic level were fed around town as well. And then I also am on the board of Bike Fort Collins. I was the vice president of that board for quite a number of years and now still remain on the board. And I got involved in that for a number of reasons. One, because I'm a cyclist and I love cycling around town here in our community and the trails and so forth. But also because Bike Fort Collins has done a lot of work in transportation equity and making sure that everyone is able to get around town. So we've done things like advocated for better Max Line bus service. We've done equity projects up in the Poudre Valley Mobile Home Park to make sure that folks in lower income neighborhoods have access to trails and bike paths and bike lanes, and so that everyone can really get around our community safely.
Thank you so much. Mr. Murray?
That is quite the beep that you have there.
Sorry, I'm going to set that to something a little quieter.
So most of my community involvement is connected to work in some way or another. I'm on the board of directors for the Larimer County Child Advocacy Center. It's actually just the Child Advocacy Center at this point. Voices Carry, where we have a safe and friendly environment for children to come in when they've witnessed or been involved in either a sexual assault or child abuse. I'm also on the child fatality review team for Larimer and Jackson counties and the child protection team here in Larimer County. I've done lots of volunteer stuff, coaching my children in various sports. I've raised 5 kids here in this jurisdiction, but that's probably the extent of my community involvement.
Thank you very much. I'm going to test something really quick. Okay, that's a little less aggressive. Okay, thank you both. This time, Assistant District Attorney, Mr. Murray, you can go next or first. How do you define justice and who deserves justice?
And please just use Mitch. I don't need that title.
That's fair.
You know, justice is a big concept. It has to encompass a lot of things. It's got to encompass all that you can find out about the individual who's charged with committing a crime, what's causing them to get to that place in their life. You've got to look at the harm to the community. You've got to look at the harm and impact to the victims. And you've got to look at how we make the community whole and make the individuals involved whole. Justice can include things like punishment, but justice is also quite often going to include rehabilitation and things being brought into play, whether that's through probation or other aspects of how the case is resolved, that try and encourage and help that person find a more law-abiding lifestyle, deal with some of the issues that may be causing them to violate the law, whether that's addiction or substance abuse or maybe some mental health issues. But justice has to be a very big picture, looking at the crime, looking at the actions, looking at the intent of the party that was committing those acts and how they've affected our community.
Thank you. Gordon?
Thanks. You know, justice, I think in the absolute simplest of terms is making sure that everyone's getting a fair shake, and also that making sure everyone feels like they're getting a fair shake, which are often, unfortunately, separate components. And so in the criminal justice system, you know, that means justice for offenders. So for defendants committing crimes, sometimes that is going to mean some sort of punishment. Much more often, I believe that means rehabilitation and access to resources, which I don't think is just for that individual person, but just for the community. Because if we are solving some of these underlying problems that drive folks to crime or into the criminal justice system, then we're able to create not just a rehabilitated person, but a healthier and safer community. And it also means justice for victims in the criminal justice system. And I think that's often where folks don't feel like their voices have been heard or that they're getting that fair shake in the criminal justice system. You know, as a career public servant, I think it's incumbent upon us to be the ones making the effort to go reach out to historically marginalized communities, to the folks that, you know, we're sort of talking about in this panel, BIPOC communities and LGBTQ communities, and making sure that they know that in the district attorney's office, we are going to fight for their justice as well. And, you know, that leads to things like greater trust and people reporting more crimes and creating a safer community.
Thank you. So this time, Gordon, you get to go first. This past legislative year, we passed 2 state bills. One was Senate Bill 2217, which was the Enhanced Law Enforcement Integrity Act, also known as Qualified Immunity. That's the first one. The second one is the Gay Panic and Transgender Panic Defense Act, and that is House Bill 201307. Can you tell us your feelings and thoughts on both of those? I won't do the beeper until 2 minutes, and then you'll have an extra 30 seconds after that if you need it. So the Qualified Immunity as well as the Gay Panic bill, give us your feelings on those and why those are necessary.
Well, thanks, and thanks for the extra few seconds, because that's a lot to cover in 2 minutes. I'll start with the second one, which is banning the gay panic defense, because that sort of picks up on right exactly what I was talking about before, and that's we need to make sure in the criminal justice system we are fighting for absolutely everybody, and everybody that does not historically have the same access to the criminal justice system that others have had, that, you know, myself as a privileged person in life have had. And so when I see something like people using the gay panic defense that is essentially, you know, lessening the severity of crimes committed against people in LGBTQ communities, that's just horrifically unacceptable. And so I'm very proud that as a state that we banned that defense this year. And again, that we can tell our community now that does not fly here, that folks in the LGBTQ community have absolutely the same rights in the system, are going to be treated the same way as victims in the system, and we're going to fight for the justice to the fullest extent. To the first bill, the HB 217, I think the law enforcement accountability bill is a great step forward in terms of making progress at reform in our criminal justice system. I was very vocal in my support of that bill. I think that's important for a few reasons. One is to make sure we get that legislation passed. It did pass, and it ended up passing with you know, largely bipartisan support down in Denver. But it didn't pass because we were relying on the status quo, and it didn't pass because Republican DAs were down in Denver fighting for it. It passed because people were marching in the streets, frankly. That's why that legislation got passed. And, you know, I'm proud that I've been to Black Lives Matter rallies here in Fort Collins. And the fact that the people spoke up and demanded accountability and reform is exactly why that happened. We can't rely on the status quo in the system to make these improvements. I was on a privilege to be on a panel with Representative Leslie Herod just a few weeks ago, who is the main sponsor of that law enforcement accountability bill, just talking about criminal justice and our different experiences in it. And, you know, her experiences certainly are different than mine. And I think we both learn stuff from each other and have different perspectives. But I let her know, and I'll say this, that I'm proud of what she accomplished with that bill. It was a huge step in the right direction, a lot of which were very basic, pragmatic reforms, like mandating body cameras and making sure that fellow officers intervened if they saw something wrong, like an excessive use of force, and things that I'm very proud to support. And I'm proud of our state and our community for having spoken up and demanding that change from their elected officials.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mitch?
Yeah, I think I'll go.
You need me to repeat them?
I'm sorry?
Do you need me to repeat them, or you got the question?
Oh, no, I think I can talk about that. You know, I'm going to go at them in the same order that Gordon did, which I think makes sense. You know, I'm incredibly proud of this state in passing the law banning that gay panic defense. It was not used very successfully in this state because our judges and our district attorney's office saw through that, saw how inappropriate it was, but it was still being brought up. And it did become an issue in a number of cases. So the fact that we were able to get together in a bipartisan manner and pass that, I think is huge. And I think ultimately you cited the earlier version of the bill, 1307. The one that actually got signed by the governor was 20-221, I think, so if anybody's wanting to look it up and get the exact language. But it not only does it take away what is a completely unjust and improper defense, but it sends a message out to the LGBT community that says you are valued, you are important. We will not allow that kind of thinking to get into our criminal justice system and mess things up. People are responsible for their behaviors. And if they attack and assault someone, they need to be held accountable for attacking and assaulting someone and not able to raise that kind of an issue. So I think that's a very good step forward. With regard to the police accountability bill, as Gordon indicated, there are a huge number of provisions in that bill beyond simply the qualified immunity issue. You know, it does mandate body-worn cameras. It limits use of things like chokeholds. It talks about a escalation process that law enforcement needs to go through, where they're advising people and talking about, I'm going to have to use this degree of force next, if they can. And I think that those kind of changes and improvements to that bill later on, where reality was brought into play, because there are going to be circumstances where law enforcement is trying to save somebody's life. Sorry, my phone's going off. And they need to be able to make quick decisions because they face life and death things every day. With regard to the qualified immunity, that was originally a federal idea. People would be sued in federal court. Qualified immunity said that the officer would be immune if they hadn't violated the law, which I think is really what we had in play a great deal in Colorado. What we did in Colorado that I have a problem with is what we went beyond removing or limiting that immunity so that someone who suffers can be made whole, so that someone who suffers can sue law enforcement and receive a recovery, to the point where it tried to make sure the officer was personally liable, and they couldn't even insure against that. So that if there was a problem and they were sued, they might lose their home that they've built to house their family. And I think some things like that are problematic in there. I think it has put a target on the backs of law enforcement to a large degree. And I'm hoping as we come into this next legislative session, the focus will be on improving law enforcement, making sure and helping them do a better job, not violating people's rights, handling things in the appropriate manner, being sensitive and educated on the issues that they're going to encounter, and not that kind of an individual punishment thing, which I don't think serves our community, really.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. Mitch, your first one. A study out of Kansas regarding the Department of Justice from 2012 to 14. They found municipal practices, which I then found that they were comparable in many other spaces, but the municipal court practices disproportionately harmed African Americans, including that African Americans are 68% less likely to have a case dismissed and 50% more likely to have a warrant issued for their arrest, again, specific to African Americans. This was found directly related to lack of effective assistance or counsel. What can you say about that?
Well, I can tell you that in the state system, we have a very robust and vigorous public defender system that does give everyone a right to that defense representation that's going to be able to bring their issues forward. And we have a pretty good working relationship in the 8th Judicial District with our Public Defender's Office. But I think that addresses a portion of what you brought up. And I think in the municipal court system, there is not the same kind of a public defender system in many, many jurisdictions. Some have it. I'm also on the chair of the board for the Justice Assistant Grant Program for Colorado. And one of the things that we funded in part was some assistance in municipal court and some programs there that were going to help defendants work their way through that. But in the state court system, we don't have that. I can't say that those same numbers won't be found as we start gathering more and more statistics in our state system. I don't think they'll be to that degree, but that kind of racial inequity is something that we need to pay attention to. We need to monitor the decisions we're making, how that is happening, and making sure that they're not being made based upon some kind of implicit bias or something like that. And I think that process of educating both people within the district attorney's office and law enforcement has been ongoing, but it needs to keep going. It needs to include everybody in the criminal justice system. It needs to include the courts and probation and anybody involved in bonds, because we can do a better job. And I think everybody, at least that I'm aware of, they want to do a better job. They're there to do what's right to help this community. So we need to be willing to look at ourselves and try and figure out, can we make improvements, and then make them.
Thank you very much. Gordon?
Well, we do have a strong public defender system in Colorado. When I was at CU Law School, I worked in the legal aid clinic and defended quite a few folks in the Boulder County system that were indigent in the criminal justice system. So I know how important that work is. But part of your question brought up a really important piece, which is about cases being dismissed. One of the great powers the district attorney's office has is the discretion to dismiss a case or to not file a case in the first place. And that doesn't have anything to do with public defenders or what someone's representation is or whether they're poor or able to afford the best counsel in the world. The district attorney's office has the discretion in Larimer County to file or to not file a case, to charge or to not charge a case, to decide what charges those will be. And that is a great and undervalued power of the district attorney's office. And that is something that we need to look into. I think that dismissing a case, going back to that first question, what is justice? Sometimes just justice is dismissing a case. Sometimes justice is filing misdemeanors instead of felonies. These are all things that are important and things that may look different for different populations, right? May look different for BIPOC communities, may look different for homeless communities, may look different for lower income communities. And we need to be looking at what that data is. And frankly, we don't have that data right now about what those charging decisions look like at all, let alone how they break down over different communities. And that data has just historically not been released. So I would change that practice of the current administration, and I would start collecting and analyzing and releasing that data so that we can A, start to understand the scope and severity of the problem, and then B, start to address it. Because we know that there are disparities in the system. I think you said something earlier, like a lot of the statistics are national, but the problems are local. And I think that's absolutely true. We need to A, bring the statistics local so that we know the problem, and then try to solve them locally, because criminal prosecution happens at the local level. The Larimer District Attorney's Office, the elected DA is the chief law enforcement officer for all of the 8th Judicial District, which is Larimer, Jackson counties, and prosecutes almost all the crime that happens here. In Larimer County. And so we need to make the change at this local level, and we can't shirk that responsibility.
Thank you very much. Just a quick reminder, folks, if you have follow-up questions, you're welcome to put them into the chat. We are, so a local question.
Take follow-up comments on questions, or should I just sit here and keep my mouth shut and wait?
You can absolutely address back.
This is a really quick one, and I don't want to get back and forth. I mean, I think your comments about making sure this discussion wasn't anything like our national debates, I think is very valid. But Gordon's point about dismissing cases is an incredibly valid one. And our elected district attorney, Cliff Riedel, I mean, he trained me for the 30 years, and he was part of training Gordon. One of the things he preached repeatedly is that justice sometimes means you dismiss the case. And I think that is a valid, very valid point.
Well, I'll take a follow-up too then there, Kim, and say that I'm glad that he imparted that wisdom on Mitch. Unfortunately, there are 40 district attorneys in the office, and the normal deputy district attorneys that are handling all the cases that we're talking about here on a daily basis have not been imparted that wisdom. And frankly, neither him nor you were part of those folks' training.
Take a poll.
Okay, thank you both for that. If you have, I'm very open to producing further information out into the community. So if you have those types of, evidence is not the right word, but if you have what you need to show that type of training that's taken place, I would love to put it out there because it is very important.
Okay.
Okay, this is a fairly local question. And for those of you listening at home, as well as our candidates, I will be producing in the chat, I will be putting some links. And so I'm going to add a link. Don't read it right now, obviously. And I will be producing at the end a list of links that go with any of the research that I cite. And this one is going to be a local Reporter Herald from Loveland news article. And it talks about currently in Loveland. I don't think this was on your given questions. Currently in Loveland, the city council has been fighting on agreeing to a general statement of anti-racism. How does leadership like this in Loveland affect the general population's views on crime and justice regarding people of color in our Larimer County communities?
Do you remember who goes first?
I think Gordon went. Oh, Mitch went first the last time, so Gordon goes first this time.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I've been following that, and it's frankly really unfortunate. I know that Mayor Marsh in Loveland was the one that worked a lot on that, and she worked with BIPOC communities in Loveland on drafting that anti-racism declaration. And with the exception of one or two other folks on the council, she got widely panned and pushed back upon by the Republican council in Loveland because they weren't willing to stand up and make an anti-racism statement. I think that sends a message to the community. sometimes it is silence that is what is sending a message to a community. And I think that is very clear in that situation, that silence on issues of racial justice in Larimer County, whether that's from our law enforcement officials at the DA's office, whether that's from the Republican Council in Loveland, speaks volumes about who justice is really for in Larimer County. So I'm proud of Mayor Marsh for having sort of done an end run around the rules they were trying to create to silence her, and eventually was able to read that statement out loud at Loveland City Council. So kudos to her. And I appreciate and I'm proud that she did that. And I wish other elected leaders in this county would stand up for the same types of things.
Thank you. Mitch?
I took your question maybe slightly differently, which is when you have a governmental organization that's willing to make a statement like that, that's willing to put something out, how does it affect the community? How does it affect people? And maybe it's the positive spin. I think that when you have a governmental organization that can say something like that, that can put that out, that can make it be a part of how they want to run their government, part of whatever guiding principles they may have, that it does make a very good statement. I would hope that things like that would be spread out amongst the marginalized communities that might be affected. Whether it's going to change the minds and thoughts of the general population, that I don't know if you can look for that immediately. But I think by making a stand, by making those kind of statements, you do lead by example. And hopefully other people will follow, and hopefully that it will have a positive effect on the general population as they see those kind of statements, as they see how government can operate with those things in mind.
Thank you. Mitch, you're first on this question. A little background. The National Transgender Center for Equality and other organizations they did a report and found that transgender individuals are more vulnerable in police and judicial situations based on profiling, misgendering, and seemingly inaccurate identity documents. Also, when violence happens and they seek assistance. How do you respond to the police presumption of fraud, like impersonation or those types of things where their IDs don't necessarily match their appearance and their name doesn't align with a gender that may be perceived?
You've got some difficulties there, and I don't know how exactly they're dealt with other than through education and exposure and communications and bringing people together to talk about those kind of issues. The reality is there are going to be people that are going to try to abuse things and come up with false identifications, but it shouldn't be that difficult to figure out whether that's in fact an issue in a case or whether it's not. If it's just that a transgender person, perhaps they don't fit a stereotype of what the officers experienced as far as name and body type or appearance, that should be something that law enforcement can learn to adjust to. You mentioned violence too. There should never be any acceptance of violence to someone. And I certainly would hope that law enforcement would never accept or dismiss violence to someone in regard to something like that. Any crime committed against a person in our community needs to be addressed, needs to be recognized. The pain, the hurt that's inflicted on the victim needs to be recognized, needs to be dealt with. In the district attorney's office, I would hope that if someone comes in, no matter what their circumstances, no matter the existence or non-existence of the issues you've described, that our DAs will treat them with dignity and respect and fairness, and our victim advocates will do the same. Our victim advocates, they care about their job. They want to do the best job possible. They want to make sure that no matter what, they're treating the victims that come before us with fairness, dignity, and respect, and helping them walk through the criminal justice system, which can be a very dangerous and not dangerous, an intimidating and scary place. I heard that bell, so I'll stop.
It keeps going back and forth on like the loud one and the not loud one. I don't know. Thank you for that. Gordon.
Well, I think it starts for education for law enforcement. And by law enforcement, I don't just mean police, I mean district attorneys, I mean prosecutors at the DA's office, to make sure that they understand, I mean, that specific issue that you mentioned regarding ID documents, as well as a multitude of other issues where, marginalized communities and LGBTQ communities face different issues and different perceptions and different struggles. And so we need to understand that in the criminal justice system so that we're dealing with things appropriately and taking into consideration appropriate mitigation and making appropriate offers. It's important for that education to occur at the DA's office, partly for what I was mentioning earlier, which is the DA's office has that power of charging. And so even if an officer made a mistake out in the street, thought that a document didn't match a person and made an arrest, there's another level of review, and that level of review is the DA's office. And so we can still correct that. That doesn't mean it was right that it happened in the first place, but we have another level of review where the DA's office can say, hey, I'm aware of these issues, of these ID document issues. I'm going to spot it here and say we need to dismiss this case immediately. And so we need to make sure that those conversations are happening because that education is in place. And so that's an important issue, and I'm glad you brought it up, and I'll make sure that happens.
Thank you. A little off format, but I want to put out there into public knowledge more. What ends up happening, oh, there's the timer to shut me up. What ends up happening is individuals are misgendered, or their identity documents, and I'm speaking to both of you, their identity documents may appear to be incorrect, or their legal name or their legal gender may be showing. And then because that is such a trauma to individuals who are transgender and intersex, it puts them into that fight or flight mode where we know from a psychological aspect that they no longer or may not be able to make the best decisions from that point forward. So what we see happen is trans or intersex, specifically any queer individual that is questioned on their identification, it hits them in a very deep way. And then we see the escalation on their psychological appearance. And then what we see is an officer's escalation. And then we see this competing thing that is happening. And as a result, trans individuals and intersex and queer individuals in general, non-binary folks as well, are then, they're talking back, and they're being disruptive, and they're doing what they need to do to defend and keep themselves safe. And so I would love, not right now, but I would love like the deeper conversation with the community about how we can educate officers at that beginning level, as well as DAs and court officials when people are in court defending these charges, resisting arrest and things like that, that actually developed from the original misgendering. So I want to put that out there into both of your minds.
That's a great explanation. I mean, I really appreciate what you just given there.
Yeah, it's bigger, and I don't know that it's really commonly known. So I think on that part, we should continue the conversation like after elections and things like that are all over, maybe with the entire district attorney's office. And I can help facilitate that.
I appreciate you clarifying some of that other the other issues there. And yes, I think we should have an ongoing conversation. I mean, to me, a lot of that is about de-escalation training, is about mental health co-responders, both things I'm very supportive of. So I'd love to continue that conversation.
Sweet. Thank you both for letting me put that in there. The next one is for Gordon first, I believe. Am I wrong?
No, that's...
Okay.
I don't recall.
How do you, oh, that was the same. In the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, back in 2015, found that nationally, Black folks were 3.7 times as likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than white folks, even though the use of marijuana was comparable. I forgot that I was putting this on the lower down on the list. How do you respond to that the reality of Black Americans are stopped, searched, detained, charged, and convicted at rates higher than white people in America, also Colorado, also Larimer County?
First?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it goes back to what we discussed, that there are absolutely racial disparities in the criminal justice system. There's no doubt about it. And so where we often see those manifest are things like marijuana possession, where someone might be contacted or searched for other reasons, and then something essentially very minor is found in their possession. I think it's the right decision that marijuana is largely legal here in Colorado. I support that. I don't think we need to be criminalizing that type of behavior. And so I'm happy about that. I do think that there is still a bit of a regressive mindset in terms of marijuana offenses in this county. We've seen a couple things happen recently. One is the governor just signed a bill vacating a lot of those old convictions. I think that was a very wise decision to do that, so that folks, and again, disproportionately, BIPOC communities were harmed by those old marijuana convictions that are now legal. And I think that was unfair, that was unjust. I'm glad the governor did that. Around the state, places like Boulder County, we saw individual DA's offices, in the last couple of years going ahead and doing that on their own to try to vacate those convictions and to help defendants actually get those off the records. So I think that's smart. Still in this jurisdiction, we're often fighting to ban people from using medical marijuana on probation. I don't think that's appropriate if it's a medically prescribed medication. I think folks should be able to use that for their health if that's what they're using. And so when we look at again, the reason that some of these laws were in place in the first place, it was often unfair and often largely disproportionately impacted BIPOC communities.
Thank you very much. Mitch.
It's an interesting question there. I mean, as Gordon pointed out, marijuana is not an issue here in Colorado so much at this point. So we don't have the same thing, but the issue that would be underlying it is still going to be present, still going to be something we need to address. And in fact, one of my sons had brought to my attention statistics, and I don't think it was marijuana. Maybe that's what he was getting, but it was harder drugs and the arrests and contacts being greater. I have, to be honest with you, some suspicion of statistics in a lot of ways. But when you have numbers that great, it needs to be looked into. We need to find out what's happening at the root of that. Where are these contacts beginning that are resulting in these arrests? And if they are, in fact, this kind of a racist approach to their law enforcement, it needs to be addressed. And we need to address it in the law enforcement agencies. And if we see that kind of thing happening in the cases that are brought to us, we need to not sit on our hands as well. We need to bring it up. One thing I talked about at a different forum was as far as addressing that kind of inherent bias and racism in the criminal justice system. I do want to train our attorneys better. I want to educate them better, and I want to do that repeatedly. And as I said before, I think that kind of bias training needs to happen across our criminal justice system. We need to empower those attorneys to speak up when they see something. We need to encourage the folks that are supervising them to speak up when they see something like that. And we need to be willing to bring it to law enforcement's attention. That kind of problem, I think you need to delve in deeper and try and figure out what's happening that's causing that and make some improvements.
Thank you. Thank you both. I appreciate that. And I'm bouncing again between LGBTQIA as well as BIPOC individuals. A lot of the things that we're talking about apply in both spaces, specifically with trans individuals in a comparison to our Black and Indigenous community members. So this next one, although it is a trans survey that I'm reporting on, it's also very applicable to African Americans. In 2015, the US Trans Survey, which was sent out throughout the nation to transgender individuals, found that trans inmates, so again, we're talking, they could have been jail or prison, trans inmates are 10 times more likely to be sexually assaulted by fellow inmates and 5 times more likely to be sexually assaulted by staff. What do we do about the current treatment and housing of transgender people, either while they're awaiting trial or after they're serving a sentence? How do we fix this problem, whether or not we see it on a local level?
So I think I'm first here. We have the federal PREA, Prison Rape Elimination Act, And it is puts a burden on our prison and jail systems to make positive steps to try and prevent sexual assault or against any inmate, which would help with the trans folks that are in that circumstance. It's going to take resources, and I think we need to be able to facilitate those changes in both the structure, the way the prisons have been run and the way they're built, and our jails, the way they're run and the way they're built, to make that less likely. One of the things that's been put in place is they've got more surveillance cameras in a prison. That was another thing that came up in one of our justice assistant grant programs, was a facility was asking to have funded additional surveillance equipment to make sure there were no spots in the jail where those kind of sexual assaults could happen. And I think we did fund that. It's that kind of thing to prevent it, but it's also education and making it a priority so that it's not acceptable. It should not be acceptable in any of our jails and prison that people are hurt in that way, no matter what their circumstances are. And I think, in a civilized society, we should be able to make good progress in that regard, both through education, that's the easy piece, but also by funding and resources and making sure that our facilities are built in a way that can prevent that. One of the things that I know Gordon and I don't see eye to eye on is the jail remodeling program, which I think will make a jail here in Larimer County that is better able to prevent things like that, that's better able to provide facilities for treatment, facilities for counseling, that will address different issues that marginalized populations might be suffering.
Thank you very much. Gordon?
Well, the first thing I think we need to do is reduce the jail population and our reliance on incarceration. Several of the policies that I plan to institute will do just that. When we're talking about reforming the inequitable cash bail system, we're talking about creating diversion programs, we're talking about reliance on restorative justice and alternatives to incarceration, when we're talking about reducing overcharging and combating over-incarceration, things that will lessen the jail population will obviously make the likelihood that those crimes occur much less. And you mentioned BIPOC communities in the question too. Obviously, for communities that are disproportionately incarcerated, reforming those things will disproportionately help those communities. So that's the first thing. The second thing is calling it a jail remodeling program is quite the spin. It was a $75 million jail expansion. Now, there was some money going to improving some living conditions in the jail. And certainly I'm very supportive of that. We need to improve the living conditions in the jail so that folks are treated fairly and humanely and have access to some resources in the jail. But it was a jail expansion, not a jail remodeling. And it included something like 160 additional beds in the Larimer County Jail. In non-pandemic times, that jail holds already between 500 and 600 people a day. And this bill was a measure was expanding it. So there are a lot of folks in custody. Again, that's just right here in Larimer County and not prison, jail. So these are huge numbers, and we need to actually fight the incarceration problem is the first way to address some of that. The second bit is I think we need to, again, be earning trust from some of these historically marginalized communities to make sure that they know they can come to law enforcement, that they can come to the deputies in the jail, that they can come to the district attorney's office, and that we're going to take these crimes seriously and we're going to fight for them. And we believe in them as victims, and we're going to prosecute those crimes because those are incredibly serious and traumatic crimes, and we need to be putting the resources towards prosecuting them, but also, again, earning the trust of folks so that they're reported, so that witnesses come forward, and so that we can handle them appropriately.
Thank you both. I have a small follow-up to question on that, and it may not take a full 2 minutes to answer. Should transgender folks, specifically trans and intersex folks, be allowed continued access to prescribed hormones, qualified therapy within jail or prison walls, and appropriate clothing and hygiene materials? If Mitch, if you want to go first on that, since it's still the same kind of question.
You ended with appropriate hygiene materials, and absolutely people should be provided with those. We should have humane living environments and the materials that are necessary for that. you talk about, and I think one of the questions you sent us involved medical treatment. I'm not a doctor. I don't know what treatments are necessary, what treatments are vital. I know when you look at some of the case law that's described surgeries and medical treatment and things like that, they talk about whether it violates the Eighth Amendment right against cruel and unusual punishment, which is an incredibly high standard. You know, I believe our inmates need to be treated fairly. They need to be treated with respect. They need to have good medical care. As to whether how broad that is, what all it should be required to be included, I don't really feel that I have any good basis for speaking on that. Certainly, if someone is going through trauma and suffering, our medical system should intervene and help in that regard. Because it needs to be humane. We are a modern society. But beyond that in specifics, I just don't feel that I have any of the qualifications to really comment beyond that.
Thank you. Gordon?
Yes to all of that. Yes to the humane conditions and clothing, and yes to prescribed medications. You don't have to be a doctor to believe in medicine and believe in science. And if a medication is prescribed to someone, they deserve that medication.
Okay, thank you very much. So I probably, when I sent you some of the questions in advance, I probably threw a term at you that you may not be familiar with in general, and that is the intersex community. For those that watching at home, I would like to just give a quick definition of what intersex people, who they are, and how they, what I guess qualifies them, or why they determine themselves to be intersex. Intersex is a biological identity, and so people who are intersex are born with either inside, outside, top, bottom, DNA, differing parts than what we traditionally see in either male or female. And so the old term, which we don't use anymore, starts with an H, and they are intersex individuals. They are equal to the trans community in the way of being discriminated against in criminal justice systems, whether that is standing in court and not having a judicial officer not able to decipher the gender of the person in front of them and how that affects the treatment in the courtroom, all the way through the jail or prison system. So what do we know, and what do we need to fix about the current healthcare of intersex folks in jail or prison, either while they're waiting trial or after they're convicted? And Gordon, I think you're first on this one.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. You know, I think that, again, when we are incarcerating folks, which I think needs to be reduced, but when it does happen, we absolutely need to make sure that we're treating folks humanely and getting folks access to the healthcare that they need. And so we need to make sure that, you know, if as a society we're deciding that certain crimes need to be incarcerated, need to be put in jails and prisons, that we're backing that up with humane and ethical treatment of folks. And so that's incredibly important. And if that's not happening here, I'm certainly willing to work for that. Again, part of that is being able as law enforcement officials to stand up and tell the community that these things are important. And, you know, going back to the $75 million jail expansion, you know, someone I think put in the chat here, right? What else could that money be used for? And I think this is a prime question, right? If it's used for actually healthcare of folks in the jail, that's not just helping those people, that's helping folks when they get out of jail, because darn near everyone at some point is getting out of jail and is getting out of prison and is re-entering our community. And we need to make sure that they trust this community, that they believe the law enforcement system is fair, and that they're coming out with a fighting chance to contribute to this community. And so, you know, providing folks, you know, ethical standards of care and humane standards of care for whatever their situation is very important. And I would certainly work with folks here in Larimer County to make sure that happens.
Thank you very much. Mitch?
I think there's two parts to that, kind of from what I heard. And the first involves medical treatment. And certainly anybody should get medical treatment that they need and that is appropriate to them. I have a fly in here, so I'm about to become a Vice President Pence meme. Get that thing out of here.
Oh,
anyway,
no.
It's going to land on me eventually. Everybody get ready to take a screenshot. Anyway, I think people should get the medical care and treatment that's appropriate to them. And it shouldn't change as to whether they're intersex or not. I mean, that they should get the medical treatment that's appropriate to them. As far as treatment within the court, there again, that is an education piece. That is just people becoming aware, sensitive to issues, and learning how best to address that. You know, when you described the emotional roller coaster that a transgender person might experience when they're going through that identification process, that's important. Sharing that's important. Allowing the people in our courts to learn from that is important. And I think that can minimize or help alleviate some of that and hopefully make everybody more comfortable with our world.
Thank you very much. I hope that flag goes away because I don't want that to be our known thing.
I'm going to try and catch him. No, just kidding.
Okay, so the next question. As a district attorney, would you propose mental health treatment as part of a reduced sentence for a person? Would you consider mental health treatment more or less important than jail time? And would you consider a sentence for mental health treatment that does not include jail time? Etc. You can go first, Mitch.
I think absolutely yes for all the above. I mean, the goal is to help our community as a whole, help the individuals that are involved, make sure victims are made whole, make sure defendants are given what they need so that they don't come back, so that they're not violating the law, so that they aren't adversely affecting other people's lives. And mental health treatment, if it's appropriate, that is definitely an important part of that. Gordon mentioned the co-responder program. I think that co-responder program is serving a really important need and that it can be expanded. I've talked about an adult diversion program. Right now, we are a pilot program for an adult mental health diversion. And what it is it's a program designed to take people who have mental health issues and divert them into the treatment that they need, making the connections with the people providing the services that can help address those, instead of bringing them into the criminal justice system. So we were one of only, I think, 5 jurisdictions that agreed and volunteered to be a part of that pilot program. It's gone through some difficult times, first trying to adjust how you're going to identify the correct population that you can have the best impact with. And then secondly, we had funding problems because the state, due to COVID and loss of funding, had withdrawn funding for that program. Well, we were able to find alternative funding. So that program is going to get back up and running. And I don't think it ever really stopped because we always have had someone in the process. I'd like to expand that to people with substance abuse and addiction problems. And I think we can try and channel them into and make the connections with the people that are providing services to address their issues. You know, it's almost more of a navigator than maybe a probation officer, someone to help them find those programs, help to make those connections and reinforce them to some degree. But I think mental health treatment is always important. You talk about, and I'm going to talk fast because I know that beeper's coming up.
Yep.
Jail versus mental health. Well, they're not mutually exclusive, really. I mean, you may have someone who's got some mental health issues, but they may have committed a crime that's serious enough, that had a big enough negative impact on someone that some jail is appropriate in that balance, trying to achieve justice, trying to achieve a just result. They're not mutually exclusive. Certainly, I can see mental health without jail. Certainly, there's going to be cases where it may be appropriate to have both. You know, if you talk to certain therapists and providers, sometimes with folks, you do need something that gets their attention to make sure they understand how serious the issues that they're dealing with are. And on occasion, jail can be a part of that.
Thank you very much. Gordon.
Well, there was a lot of parts to that question, but let me start with the question of, is mental health treatment more important than jail? And I think the answer is absolutely yes, that it is. You know, jail is often a very short-term solution. We can send someone to jail for 30 days and maybe there won't be a crime committed for those 30 days, but what happens for the next 30 years while that person is a part of our community? Mm-hmm. If we're treating the root causes of crime and of criminal behavior, which are often mental health related, substance abuse related, homelessness related, then we are not only giving that person a better shot, but we're going to keep our community safer because we're going to reduce recidivism. In that vein, we need to drastically increase our programs. The mental health co-responder program is super. It's also much, much too small. We have agencies here well, first we have agencies without access to mental health co-responder programs here in Larimer County, but the agencies that do, Fort Collins Police has something like 220 sworn police officers, and I believe one, maybe now it's two. I think they're trying to hire a second mental health co-responder. Loveland has something like 110 sworn police officers with 2 mental health co-responders. It's just not nearly enough. We saw a case in Loveland just a couple months ago where someone was contacted at a Target in the middle of a mental health crisis, and there were no mental health co-responders. If ever, and we've all seen the videos of this, at least a lot of us have, if ever there was a situation where they could have been helpful in preventing a situation, that was it, and they weren't there. And so we need to expand those programs. We can't just check the box and say it exists, and so that's enough. And we need to communicate that to our communities so that these programs are valued and are funded, not just as part of social justice, because they're the right thing to do, and I believe that they're the right thing to do, but because of criminal justice. And these programs are going to reduce crime and keep us safer. The diversion program is completely inadequate. We have neighboring counties like Boulder County that in the last couple of years have sent thousands of people through their adult diversion programs for things like mental health and substance abuse. Here, it's a teeny pittance of that number. So we need to drastically increase these programs so that folks have access to mental health resources and so that they have them quickly. If we're talking about a diversion program, and I know folks not in the legal community sometimes don't know exactly what that means. It means that we're bringing folks in either pre-arrest or right after arrest and getting them right back out of the criminal justice system so that we're addressing the actual behavior and we're providing that mental health treatment right off the bat. That helps them because they're getting access quicker. It helps us because it's going to address the root causes of that problem, and it's going to reduce the burden on the criminal justice system so that we can focus on more serious crimes and violent crimes and other things that are impacting this community on a whole nother level. So relying on behavioral health treatment generally is an incredibly important part of the reason I'm running for district attorney. We saw in 2018, the mental health ballot initiative passed here in Larimer County. Luckily, unfortunately, there was very little law enforcement support for that initiative. And there was no support, silence from the DA's office in terms of how those programs and those resources help community safety and criminal justice here in Larimer County. So those are things that I would speak up and advocate about and tell our community are important.
Thank you very much. Gordon, you're first on this one. What are the factors you would consider in offering a plea agreement to a drug offender who is also an addict?
Well, addiction is a huge and growing problem in Larimer County. There's no question. As our community's grown and as some of these problems have grown, nationwide, really, whether we're talking about the opioid and heroin epidemic or the methamphetamine epidemic, these are huge problems here. And from the user level, we see a huge amount of cases coming through the Larimer County system that are drug user cases. And sometimes they're associated with some other low-level and nonviolent crimes as well, but it constitutes a large percentage of what we're seeing. Those are cases that are perfect for a diversion program. There is no diversion program for drug use in Larimer County, none, zero. We need those programs, again, for all the reasons I just mentioned about mental health, all apply. It's quick, it gets folks access to resources, it's not wasting the time of criminal justice system and police and prosecutors and judges on these things when we can get folks in and out into resources. When folks successfully complete something like that, substance abuse diversion program, not only are they better off, but again, they're totally out of the criminal justice system, meaning they're not going to have convictions following them the rest of their lives that might prevent work, might prevent housing, might prevent student loans, and things that can really follow someone. So the diversion programs are hugely beneficial, and I think we need to include those. Again, a lot of crime is addiction driven, and we need to understand that. The current administration testified against last year, 2 years ago, moving drug felonies to drug misdemeanors. These are user level crimes. And they testified against that. I supported that bill because we don't need to concentrate on felonizing this behavior. We need to concentrate on treating it.
Thank you. Mitch?
Can you read the question to me again?
Yes. What are the factors you would consider in offering a plea agreement to a drug offender who is also an addict?
So when you talk about a drug offender, you're going to have a huge spectrum, right? You're going to have people who have just a user amount, all the way up to a drug offense is going to be people who have kilos and are destroying and harming our community. And I'm telling you, if you get up here where someone's dealing that kind of quantity, the fact that they're an addict still needs to be taken into account, still needs to be considered, but it's going to be much less relevant. If we're down talking about users, user amounts of drugs, addiction is absolutely going to be one of the highest things that's considered, and treatment is going to be the goal of the criminal justice system. It was the goal of the criminal justice system before drug charges were moved to misdemeanors, and it's still going to be the goal of the criminal justice system now that mainly those possession charges are in fact misdemeanors. There were efforts against reducing those. Those efforts centered on the idea that by having that felony there, by having that, you could motivate a lot of people. And I talked to numerous treatment providers, and they said, the legislature is taking away one of the few tools we have to help get people through treatment by changing the level of that offense. Now, that's looking back. That's the past, that's history. It's not now. Those possession charges are misdemeanors. So we've got to look at the tools that we have, which have been limited some, and figure out how best to use those to achieve that same aim. That same aim is going to be getting those people connected with treatment. And a drug addiction is not a one-time thing. It's not like you can put them in treatment once and, hey, good, we're done. It's something that's ongoing, and it has to be ongoing. So what you need to do is make those connections between the people who are having the drug problems and the services that are available to help them deal with it, so they can take advantage of those. So they can be a part of that treatment even when they're not involved in the criminal justice system. I think getting the criminal justice system out of that business is a good idea. And the more that we can get people connected and get them treatment, get them dealing with those addiction issues without criminal justice involvement, the better off we all are.
Thank you. Thank you both. Next question. So we know within the LGBTQIA community that at least 40% of homeless individuals nationwide, which is also the local statistic aligns, at least 40% of homeless individuals are LGBTQIA, a higher number of BIPOC as well. 40% of us in my community facing homelessness resulted from housing insecurities, may or may not be related to the pandemic. So we'll see how that grows. But what's your stance on criminalization of homelessness and how it can affect that huge disproportionate number of LGBTQIA community members as well as BIPOC community members?
Well, that is an amazing statistic. I mean, that's very surprising to me. Homelessness is an issue that is a societal-wide one. And we need to work on things in our community that provides housing, that provides the opportunity for people to get employed where they can have their own housing, that helps address that issue. Criminalization of it, I know that there's some jurisdictions where what they've done is nobody's going to get arrested for camping in the park unless there's, I'm going to get that backwards. If there is in fact room at the mission, if there is in fact room at a shelter, that they're not going to get any kind of a charge for that, that's going to be, I'm doing a really poor job of this.
No, you're okay.
Charges will only come if that housing is available and somebody's not taking advantage of it, which I do believe has some of the very positive aspects of encouraging people to use those systems, to use those facilities where they can be connected with folks that are having treatment. That does not address at all the question of why LGBTQ folks would be so disproportionately represented in that. And that is definitely a problem that needs to be addressed. Perhaps if I want to put on my my most optimistic hat, I would think that if you have societal education, if you have issues being addressed by people, more employment opportunities are going to arise, and because of that, everybody will be able to rise up and be able to deal with that, and they won't be suffering with that. If the homelessness is because of other mental health issues, which I wouldn't equate with LGBTQ at all. But if it is, maybe the, you know, the increase in the mental health, increase in our behavioral health facility here in this jurisdiction will help aid some of that.
Thank you. Gordon?
Yeah, homelessness is certainly a growing problem. You know, it was a growing problem before the pandemic, and I too am sort of scared to see what it looks like after the pandemic, or as we keep going on in this pandemic. It's scary for a lot of folks out there, no question. You know, at the municipal level, there's an interagency program here in Larimer County where prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges, advocates from the homeless community, substance abuse and mental health providers, housing access folks all meet together to try to figure out what has driven someone into the criminal justice system, why they're a repeat player in the criminal justice system, and how can we help break that cycle, get them the access to the resources they need to stop committing criminal behavior that's bringing them into the system. At the county level, at the DA's office, there's no such program. So the first thing is I'd like to bring that type of collaboration to the DA's office so that we're not just doing the same thing over and over and over thinking it's going to finally work, because it doesn't. So we need to work with our community partners and collaborate. You know, I've met with folks from you know, Homeward Alliance and Homeless Gear and Outreach Fort Collins about what we can do to help these communities and to make sure that they're not entering the criminal justice system. The other thing to realize is that, you know, a lot of these crimes aren't things like camping or literal homelessness, but crimes that occur in and around homelessness. One thing that occurs in this jurisdiction and in this current administration is overcharging petty thefts into felonies. And when folks steal something of petty value from places like Target and Walmart and have just been trespassed in that location before, the current administration often charges those people with class 4 felonies for burglary. That is felonizing and criminalizing homeless behavior. The type of folks that are stealing petty items from Walmart, these aren't sophisticated networks of thieves. These are people facing struggles in our own community for the most part. Now, folks shouldn't be stealing. We need to hold folks accountable, but we don't need to treat them like felons and at every opportunity overcharge those crimes. So that's a prime example of something that is currently happening, actively happening, and that I will stop.
Thank you. If I can, for just a moment, do a little additional education that should lead to a larger conversation. One of the issues that we face specific to rural areas like Larimer County is that trans individuals don't fit in at shelters. So we have shelters for women, we have shelters for men. In Larimer County, we don't have shelters that are specifically safe for trans individuals. Just a few years ago, our shelter that was originally, they're now housed under a different group, but the original housing of that group of the mission, they would send folks who were transgender to a church for therapy or for consultation based on their gender identity, which had nothing to do with the reason why they needed a place to sleep that night. Those types of day programs that are available for individuals that are homeless or experiencing homelessness are not accepting training. They're not doing training on LGBTQIA communities. I don't know, but I don't know positive or negative if they are doing or are not doing trainings on cultural competency to include people of color. So just as a further conversation, we have to start talking about how we want folks to use the services that are available, such as homeless shelters or the mission. However, if a person is transgender, they are not safe there if they choose to use that in all circumstances. So if they choose to camp independently because there's no gendered section, there's no risk of sexual assault, there's no risk to their health by being in a space that is their own versus a group population where people may or may not harm them just based on their gender identity. So I definitely want to continue that conversation later, and I think it's good to inform the large group of those types of things. And for those community members in here, I'm thinking off the top of my head, so I may not be expressing 100% of what the conversation needs to be about. But thank you on both of those, for both of you. We are closing in on time a little bit. And so A couple of hot topics. What have you contributed personally towards stopping sex trafficking in Larimer County? Gordon, you're first on this.
Well, sex trafficking is certainly a very serious issue. We got another question that we're probably not going to get to, so I might try to combine those about dealing with sex workers. And I think the first step in making sure that we're dealing with sex trafficking appropriately is letting folks know, letting the community know, and letting vulnerable victims who are often sex workers know that it is not them that we are looking to prosecute. It is the folks taking advantage of them that we are looking to prosecute, the traffickers, not the workers. And I think we need to make sure that we get that message out. And I don't think that's ever been done in this community. The other thing that allows us to focus on these crimes, and that's an incredibly serious and concerning crime that does indeed happen in this community. I mean, in many communities, but certainly this one, especially being on an interstate as well, is that when we are diverting lower level cases, when we're diverting nonviolent cases, when we're diverting young adult cases and drug possession cases, then we have the resources to free up to focus on some of these more complex matters. Certainly sex trafficking is a complex situation. It takes prosecutorial resources, it takes law enforcement investigation resources. And if we are making sure that we are dealing with cases appropriately and using our discretion to, again, divert out and provide access to resources to lower level cases, then we're going to be able to focus on some of these crimes like sex trafficking more and get out in the community and educate people and reach out. Again, make sure folks in these communities trust us. If they don't know who the DA is or who law enforcement is, if they don't know that the DA is going to have their back, they're not going to report these crimes. People aren't going to be witnesses to these crimes. They're not going to want to testify to these crimes. So it's incumbent upon us to go out and build that trust and focus on the right things and focus on those on top.
Thank you very much. Mitch?
Well, we do in fact have things in place trying to help avoid girls getting involved in this sex trafficking thing. Right now we have a juvenile diversion program that's directed at girls that are displaying high risk behaviors. And its purpose is to connect them with people, to help give them the resources they need to be able to avoid that. So we are taking very affirmative action in that regard. And I've been a part of many cases where there have been the workers that are contacted. And I think, you have different levels of sex workers in that regard. And I'm not sure if that was the question, but what law enforcement has done in those instances is they have done everything they can to try and connect those people that are being trafficked with resources to help them get out of that lifestyle. Now, sometimes what they're hoping to do is encourage them to testify against the trafficker and saying, your charges will be reduced to this, or we'll be able to help you with this, but we need to be able to get more information about the trafficker. Sometimes it is tied to that, but there are very direct efforts recognizing that it's not the person involved that's engaging in those sexual activities. It's the people that are taking advantage of them, both the Johns that are taking advantage of them and those who are coercing them into this life. And so we need to continue to do that and make those outreaches. But we do have things like that in place, active, going right now. And I've been a part of that. Another thing that I do, which is just a small piece of that, is the civil forfeiture arena, in which if you have a massage parlor or something like that that's been being used for those kind of sexualized activities, taking the profit out of it and taking the profit away from someone. There was another case I had where a guy was arrested for pimping, taking those profits away. So both of those, I think, are very direct efforts trying to reduce sex trafficking as it might happen in our jurisdiction. It is an important issue. There are very vulnerable people who get brought into that, and it can be incredibly damaging. So we need to be sensitive to that, and we need to continue to make sure we are prosecuting and putting our efforts in prosecuting the bad guy and reaching out and trying to help those who are being taken advantage of.
Thank you. I forgot to set you the timer on that one, so you did good. And I did get them out of order. So the next question is, because LGBTQIA folks are often underemployed, meaning that they are less likely, in many cases, specifically our trans community, and even more specifically our trans communities of color, because they are less likely to obtain livable wages and employment. Something around 70%, and I'll find the exact number and make sure I put it in the list of links. Something around 70% of trans individuals have engaged in sex work, meaning that they've accepted payment or goods or services, meaning housing, things like that, in exchange for sexual activity. What is your stance on sex workers within that definition?
I think you changed the definition a little, so I'm going to have to think about that. I mean, you know, it is incredibly unfortunate that someone would feel coerced in that way into that role. And I think the criminal justice system needs to recognize that and then try and address some of those underlying issues. It's not an offense that currently, you know, you don't have a bunch of DAs lining up to be aggressive in prosecuting people who are put in the position you are. And I think that you just described, not that you are, that you described. And I think we need to make sure we encourage getting those people connected with some services who can help get them out of that lifestyle, help get them to a place where they don't feel desperate enough that they have to do that. And that's what I'm hearing you describe, someone who's doing that because they are in desperate or dire straits. You know, as I said before, I think as a community, as a society, we do have a lot of room for improvement. And we do that by education. We do that by exposing people to different thoughts and ideas. And hopefully we can keep making progress so that no one ends up feeling that they are in such dire circumstances that they have to resort to that.
Thank you. Gordon.
Well, I think what we need to do is make sure that folks in law enforcement, that prosecutors understand the trauma that some victims have undergone, even those that end up as defendants, maybe in the criminal justice system, and what that trauma is. I mean, I think it sort of reminds me of your question before for further discussion about, you know, the trauma that might incur with the misidentification on a license due to transgender issues. And so there's often more to these cases than we realize at first blush. And that's true with a lot of things in the criminal justice system, but I think that very clearly applies to some of these issues, to this issue of sex workers and of transgender folks in that industry. And so I think we need a better awareness. We need to train and educate our deputy district attorneys on what those issues are and how they've impacted folks, and work with the community to make sure that, again, we're earning folks' trust, we're reaching out to communities, that communities know we're there for them and to fight for them, and that you know, we'll believe them if they're victims, and that you know, we'll give folks second chances when they're defendants sometimes too.
Thank you very much. Okay, I have a couple of other questions. However, I think that just to respect everyone's time, that I will make one question and then we will have probably 3 minutes or so of closing remarks from each of you. So I have one more question before any closing remarks. And that is, there is a lot of debate around the terms defunding the police. What does that mean to you? And how do you define that? What are your feelings on that concept? Gordon, you are first.
Well, I don't try to define it because so many people mean so many different things. What I believe in is refunding our community. You know, I think that our community is better off and is going to be safer when we are using resources for the things that they're most effective for. We need police and well-trained police and well-qualified police to be keeping our community safe. You know, I've spent my career in law enforcement and I'm proud to have worked alongside a lot of the officers in this county. That being said, they're not trained to do everything perfectly. You know, I often use the example, I'm a law enforcement officer, my wife is a social worker. You know, I can't do her job because I'm not trained to do it. And she can't do my job because she's not trained to do it. And so we need folks focusing on what they're best equipped to do. And it's the truth that often an armed officer is not the best equipped to deal with every situation. Sometimes a mental health co-responder is going to be best equipped to deal with a situation, to deal with someone in crisis. And so we need to make sure we're funding those programs. That's not an issue of taking money away from police agencies necessarily. Some of our local co-responder programs, it's the law enforcement agencies that are funding those programs. And so that's super. But as I said earlier, it's just nowhere near enough. So we need to make sure we're doing that. And when we do that, things like co-responder programs, that's also taking some of those burdens off police so that they can be free to investigate some of these serious crimes, to investigate sex trafficking, to be better trained to deal with other situations, and so that folks are being used in the best way they can. I think another part of that conversation is, and even though this isn't maybe in the term, is about accountability and holding law enforcement accountable. The role of the DA is sort of twofold. One is to have a strong relationship with law enforcement so that we make sure that we can adequately investigate and prosecute serious cases. The second is to be a check and a balance on law enforcement. And the DA also has that role and has the role of needing to hold law enforcement accountable when wrongdoing occurs. And that starts with things like the law enforcement accountability bill that you asked at the top of this program. And that goes all the way down to the everyday relationships that district attorneys are having with police, and the ability to push back and creating a culture where you can push back on decisions, both small and large. And so, I think this community is better off when we have well-qualified, well-trained police, but when we also realize that, justice doesn't just come in the form of policing, that a safe and healthy community needs a lot of other resources, and that as the chief law enforcement officer, the DA needs to end the silence of the office and actually stand up and advocate for some of those other priorities as well.
Thank you very much. Mitch.
Well, I can tell you that there are, in fact, people who, when they say defund the police, they mean defund the police. They mean take away their money, take away their resources, reduce their budget by astronomical numbers. And I do disagree with that. I probably agree with 99% of what Gordon just said. I think it's very reasonable and appropriate. We need law enforcement, and we expect professionals. And society is demanding that they have the training and the skills to deal with a variety of different circumstances, that they deal with it in a trauma-informed, sensitive manner, that they do have the training and skills and abilities to deal with marginalized communities, to be sensitive to what they're going through, to make sure that they're not escalating things, but are in fact de-escalating them. And that requires resources. That requires the funding, the time, the manpower to be able to get trained in that regard. And I think it's vitally important that we do so. The fact is there are violent crimes that happen in our community. There are robberies and murders and sexual assaults. And we do need police to be able to respond to those. We also need police to be able to respond to lesser level of crimes, be able to deal with the community conflicts that happen in a neighborhood or on a street corner or wherever it might be, and be able to address those appropriately. A big part of what law enforcement does is community safety, and that needs to be the whole community. That needs to be inclusive of everyone and sensitive to everyone. And I think that law enforcement needs to be given the resources to be able to do that. What I see in our local law enforcement is a desire to do their job better, to be sensitive to those issues, to be able to communicate and contact communities, all of the different communities that make up our jurisdiction, in a way that is respectful, but can address their issues, because the marginalized communities are also victims in a lot of these cases. And those law enforcement officers need to be able to be out there responding appropriately to that, to protecting that part of our community. I don't support the idea of defunding the police. I support the idea of having our law enforcement become better and better at what they do, be more professional. I do support funding being given to things like the co-responder program. Whether that budget comes out of the law enforcement budget, whether it's a piece of the mental health budget, whether it comes in part from the behavioral health initiative that this community so wisely passed here a couple of years ago, making those resources available will help us all. And I think that was longer than I was supposed to go, but I'm going to stop now.
You're okay. I'm not that person that's going to interrupt. So as a small closing remark, I want to, before you each get that moment, I want to make sure that there's a definite understanding of like A plus B equaling C. So we have people who are living in the community, and we're striving as queer folks and people of color, we're striving to fit into spaces that may be square pegs in round holes. And as that's happening, we're seeing things like the old school, they used to call it the school to prison pipeline. We're seeing those things happening in real life. We're seeing it in Black communities. We're seeing it in Hispanic communities. We're seeing it in trans communities and overall queer communities. And so as you close today, like, remember that when round peg or square pegs don't fit into round holes, that we create this larger problem. And so we get to the point that the criminal issues are happening in the first place, whether it's theft, whether it's assault, whether it's having the wrong ID. Those things are happening in the very beginning, and they're being escalated through a system that does not conform and does not accept and include individuals. And then even broader, when there are consequences, we have police officers that are not trained and long-term not trained. That's something that we can fix very, very quickly. Training programs are absolutely available. So we have these square pegs again, and they're being pushed through this system again. And we have police officers, and then we have judicial agents throughout, whether it's county, city, municipal, county, or even the state level. We have all of these pushing these square pegs through this, and there's discrimination every step along the way. And so what we end up with these huge and unfortunately high numbers of queer and BIPOC people who are surrounded by felony convictions, which re-encourages homelessness, which re-encourages lack of education. You start as a square peg and you evolve into this system that is just not created for you. And that a lot of times that first contact with that system are police officers, and police officers that may not have that level of accountability that we really can fix fairly quickly. So as I say that, there are other questions that we have kind of missed, but the one I want to ask you to kind of work in is what the makeup of the district attorney's office looks like. I wasn't able to find racial demographics or gender demographics specific to the district attorney's office. So if somebody could fill me in on what that actually looks like in Larimer County as you're kind of starting your final sentence. So, or your final, I'll start with 3 minutes, and then you can take a couple of seconds after that to finish your sentences, if that's okay. Mitch, go ahead.
So I'm going to take your questions about the district attorney's office as just kind of a diversity. Is there diversity in the district attorney's office?
Yes.
And we do have diversity. We have a wide variety of age ranges. We have people from different ethnic backgrounds. And we try to make an environment where they can be heard and they can participate and be a part of it. We have, and I'm going to apologize right now, but the head of our office manager, and I think her title's much bigger than that, but she's an African-American woman, and she is an important and vital part of that. And she has a great deal that she brings and offers and to that office and improves what we do. We're putting labels on people, and I'm hesitant to do that, but you asked questions, so I'm going to blame you. We just hired another Hispanic attorney into our office. So there is an effort to create a diverse environment, and there's definitely an effort, and I intend to greatly expand upon our efforts to make sure those people know they can be heard and that different voices can be heard, that people are included. I think we do a lot of that through education. We do a lot of that through the training of the people in that office. And there is no doubt we have a lot of improvement that can be made. but I am sensitive to that, and I think it is important. I recognize the value and increase in the quality of what we do that is brought by having that inclusive environment that allows people to share and bring their ideas forward. The other piece of what you talked about was our criminal justice system and how it treats people. And it shouldn't be that we're trying to force a square peg into a round hole. The hole needs to be malleable. The hole needs to be able to be adjusted to fit the person that's coming in, to recognize them where they're at, and deal with the issues that they have where they're at. We shouldn't be trying to change those people. We should be trying to make sure our system is flexible enough and open enough that it can be fair and just for everybody that comes in. You know, you talk about people that get put on this track that leads to that criminal behavior. I think by that education, by expanding our understanding of different people and different experiences, that we can improve that. And my goal is to do that. I do intend to reach out to the various communities that make up this jurisdiction. I want to hear from them. I want to listen to them. I want to be able to answer their questions and recognize their concerns and make sure that I can bring that information back to the district attorney's office so we are doing the best job possible. You know, part of what I have repeatedly said that I'm running for is that I want to do justice in our courts. I want to protect this community. And this community includes all of you that are here on this and anybody who's going to be listening. And it is vitally important that we protect that community. Protecting that community doesn't mean just locking people up in jail either. It is rehabilitation. You cannot protect this community. You cannot make a safe community until you deal with people's issues. And rehabilitation is the quickest way. Because as Gordon pointed out earlier, people get out of jail. They get out of prison. And we need to put things in place to try and put them in the best position possible so that when they re-enter our society, they're re-entering with the ability to be law-abiding, with the ability to not harm others, and to allow people to live their lives. I think I've gone beyond what your question is, but that's my thoughts on what you've given me.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate your time tonight. Gordon.
Well, thank you. I'll pick up, I guess, on that first question. And the unfortunate reality is the district attorney's office is not very diverse. You know, we can look at some of the other staff members, and having diversity on staff is incredibly important. And some of those staff members are incredibly valuable to the office. The fact is, a district attorney's office is led by attorneys, and attorneys are making the decisions. Attorneys are driving policy. Attorneys are creating the vision. And so you need diversity amongst the leading attorneys. There are 8 attorneys in the administration of the current DA's office that my opponent leads. All 8 are white, all 8 are conservative, and 6 of the 8 are men. So it's not a diverse office. We need to fix some of those problems. That starts with recruiting folks from all over Colorado, all over the country. And then it's we need to empower those voices when they are at the district attorney's office to make sure that folks feel like their voices are valued, and creating a culture where those voices are valued. You know, we also need to reach out to the diverse parts of this community, even beyond whatever the makeup is or isn't at the district attorney's office. And historically, that just has not been done. You know, we need to go to where folks are. Participating in forums like this, you know, meeting with NoCoSafeSpa, meeting with the BIPOC Alliance, meeting with these other, outreach for Collins with the homeless community, all sorts of folks. We need to go to where they are and build trust, earn trust, and make sure that we are really representing everyone, and that folks know that we will represent them and will fight for them as victims in the system, and that, you know, we're going to give everyone that fair shake, that we're looking for justice, not just prosecution. You know, I was at the district attorney's office for a long time, and I saw a lot of the problems with complacency firsthand. We talked about some of those issues here tonight, really quite a few of them. So thank you, Kim. Those were great questions. And I know you said a lot of folks submitted them, so thanks to everyone. But homelessness, addiction, opioid crisis, over-incarceration, mental health issues. These are all growing problems in our community and serious problems in our community. And we need new ideas and bigger ideas and collaborative ideas to address these problems in 2020. They simply don't look like they used to look. Conversation on criminal justice has evolved greatly. Unfortunately, we see a lot of people don't believe in those things. You know, at the national level, we've seen both leaders of the Republican Party at debates in recent weeks essentially deny systemic racism exists. The message that sends to communities all over this country is that they are not as important in the system, whether that's the BIPOC community or otherwise. And we've seen things locally. You know, my opponent has been waving flags at Back the Blue rallies, and I've been marching at NoCoSafeSpa for the Pride March. It's different visions and different values and different priorities. I'm proud to be the first person to challenge this DA's office in essentially 30 years, and I would be the first Democrat to ever hold this office. And so I'm really proud to be doing that and to be challenging the status quo and to hopefully bring a fairer and more just system to Larimer County, where everyone believes they're represented, that we can still prosecute the serious crimes, but that we're giving folks a second chance. And, you know, I decided to run because I believe that social justice and criminal justice are not at odds with each other like they historically have been. And I intend to put that in place here in Larimer County, and hope to continue these conversations with everyone here and everyone else in the community as we go forward.
Perfect. Thank you also for your time tonight. To both of you, I'm eternally grateful for having this forum and having this available, because I was born in Northern Colorado, and we don't often get the opportunity to be loud, to have these conversations, to even be able to rant for 2.5 minutes about how our community, our queer communities, are misunderstood. So I appreciate your time. I'm grateful for this space. Individuals watching from home, if you have additional questions, we can absolutely, I can forward those through, or you can ask them on their social media pages, because that's the format that we have. I will make this recording available to view as well. It takes a little while for it to send me the link, but I will make this recording available to view, as well as the chat log, because there are a lot of resources. And if you look onto the NoCoSafeSpace webpage or social medias, I'll be posting the link to the links page that will have all of the stats and things like that that I threw out tonight. So thank you, Gordon and Mitch. I genuinely appreciate your time this evening and your dedication to our queer and BIPOC communities moving forward. And we look forward to holding you accountable to whoever wins, to what we can do. So
thank you for hosting. And I would just throw out, if you go to my website, votemitchmurrayda.com, there's my email addresses there. I'm much better with email than I am with Facebook Messenger, as you and I have experienced. So
yes.
Yeah.
For sure. Gordon, what's your website? Yeah,
thanks. It's McLaughlinforDA.com. And McLaughlin, well, it's spelled right under my name here, I guess, but for those listening, McLaughlin.com.
Perfect. Somebody typed yours in, and I just typed Mitch's into the chat.
Great.
So if folks are interested, definitely follow up. And my last thing is, make sure that you do your ballots, make sure that you turn it in, and vote. So thank you all tonight, and you can reach me online if you need me. Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Thanks so much, everyone.